Sadistic pleasure is something which can be explored within cinema. We culturally consume crime and violence as a form of entertainment. Are these glamorized images of transgressive topics destructive or in fact healthy? And do these infamous scenes and characters change people's ideas on transgressive topics? I've chosen to focus my presentation on violence in cinema, and I've chosen Scarface and Django Unchained as examples. Both give good examples of imitation and catharsis. These subject matters can be approached in different ways through film, comically, glamorously, and heroically. The British Board of Film Classification, the BBFC, is responsible for examining and classifying films before they are distributed. However, censorship and classification of movies did not always exist. The BBFC was established in 1912 because of demands of the film industry. The BBFC was put into place to uniform standards, and in 1984, Parliament passed the Video Recording Act, which made it illegal to sell or supply a video that the board hadn't examined and clarified. Video nasties was a term that first came about in the Sunday Times in a story issued in May 1982. This term has been used a lot in the media and has been used as a scapegoat for many different criminal acts, where the Daily Mail would cause people to believe that these video nasties were evil and were promoting violent and criminal behaviour. The Daily Mail started an anti-video nasty campaign, which scapegoated the rise in violence. This campaign suggested that there was a link between on-screen violence and real-life violence. This campaign created a moral panic and suggested that just by being exposed to this material, it would lead to people becoming more violent. James Bulger's murder is one which has been well known in the media from its attachment to on-screen violence. Many suggest that James's two 10-year-old murderers have been influenced by the movie Child's Play 3. This video nasty was then used as an explanation for the actions of his two killers. Bandura introduced the idea of significant persons in a social environment providing cues for how to do something or behave. These significant people were called models. For example, a child could learn how to shoot a gun by simply watching a video and imitating it. This film caused a moral panic amongst people through the media, suggesting that James Bulger's killers learnt their behaviour from this video nasty and replicated it. By watching these models in this movie commit violent crimes, it desensitizes us and normalizes this behaviour. And for people who are not as comfortable with their self-identity, this imitation can be very dangerous. Katz argued that many sociologists failed to explore the seductive nature of crime. Katz saw crime as having a deliberate nature and sees it as having seductive qualities. For example, figures of crime have exciting and envious personas. For example, the badass. People aspire to become the badass, and this is what drives people to act in these transgressive ways. According to Bandura, the more significant and looked up to the model is, the more influential the person becomes. A good example of this would be famous Hollywood actors. With their lavish lifestyles, beautiful partners and fame, why would you not want to achieve this? Hollywood stars have impact and power over the people by watching their films. By seeing violence being portrayed in these blockbusters, it can be argued that these actions are imitated more than if they were displayed by others. With the film industry being portrayed so glamorously, people admire the stars and the results of being a star. Society is always being reminded of the benefits actors and actresses reap. Bandura argues that the observer is much more likely to imitate the behaviour if they see the model win an award. Televised award ceremonies are an obvious display of winning an award. However, there are other ways in which the public become aware of the awards of being a famous movie star. Things like MTV Cribs and gossip magazines allow us to have insight into the great things which result from being an actor or an actress. Despite the glitz and the glamour of a lifestyle which is demonstrated in the film Scarface, people tend not to focus on the lows Tony suffers and the extremes he had to endure in order to achieve this power status. The beautiful women, eccentric houses, and unlimited drug supplies are all distractions to the violence and horror endured to get to all the above. Violence may be portrayed as a route towards achieving a good lifestyle, and if people choose to imitate these actions, they should aim to remember what it took for him to reach the top. But because this movie is so dramatic, the violence also becomes glamorized, which is where the threat of copycatting appears. In Django Unchained, there are very different types of violence throughout the movie. In the beginning of the movie, all we see is cruel, horrific violence endured by the slaves. We see whipping, fist fights and killings, and this unfair violence is distressing and sickening. However, towards the end of the movie, the reaction to violence changes. When Django becomes a more heroic figure, and we finally see him seek revenge against the people who have mistreated the slaves. We find ourselves rooting on this violence, as it almost seems cathartic and helps to relieve the built-up anger we have to the crueler characters. Catharsis is the argument which counteracts the idea of imitation and desensitization. It suggests that on-screen violence can be therapeutic and relieve any built-up aggression without having to carry out any violence in ourselves to relieve it. There is also the argument of violence being easily desensitizing to the people watching Django Unchained, where the character Dr. Schultz does partake in a lot of violence throughout the movie, but does so comically, which tends to lighten the mood and changes these violent scenes, which should be distressing and upsetting, but are taken lightly because of the humour with it. There has been much research done on the topic of on-screen violence versus real-life violence. There is empirical data which supports perspectives of imitation and desensitization, but not many studies have found hard evidence which supports catharsis. People like Bandura and Hudson in 1961, Bandura and Ross in 1963, the Bobo doll study, Walter and Grusek in 1977, and Bryant and Zillman have all put together data which suggests that the result of on-screen violence can be more real-life violence due to people imitating behaviour and becoming desensitized to violent images. The movie industry surrounds us and has a strong influence over our behaviour. It is hard to escape these images and not relate them to our everyday life. Imitation, copycatting and desensitization is a concern when looking at on-screen violence. But with age restrictions from the BBFC, hopefully the people watching this content will be a less influential audience. With the film industry being full of glamour and drama, this hyper-reality can become dissatisfying when comparing it to our normal everyday life. There are arguments that violent media causes violent people to seek more violent material, which would suggest that on-screen violence affects people differently. It is violent people that we should be concerned over watching this material and then replicating it.